Welcome back to the channel, everyone. If you love captivating stories about men transforming into women in unique and fascinating ways, then be sure to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. Now, let's jump right into today's tale.
The city was glowing, not with the harsh, artificial brightness of midday, but with that special luminescence that only comes after dark, when streetlights cast warm pools of gold on sidewalks. When windows become squares of amber and shadowed buildings, when headlights trace lazy patterns through intersections. It was the kind of night that felt both intimate and vast, as if the urban landscape had transformed itself into something more magical, more forgiving. The soft golden haze of streetlights blurred with the hum of late-night traffic as Erin stepped out of the car, her hand still resting in Michael's. His fingers were warm against hers, the light pressure both reassuring and electric. He'd held her hand throughout dinner, finding moments to reconnect even when they needed both hands for eating, a touch on her wrist, a brush of his foot against hers under the table, small gestures that maintained the circuit of energy between them. Dinner had been perfect. Not perfect in the flawless Pinterest board sense, but perfect in the real way. The booth had been a little too snug. The waiter had forgotten their drinks at first, and Michael had accidentally dropped his fork with a loud clatter that made the table behind them laugh. "I swear I'm typically more coordinated," he'd said, his embarrassment fading into self-deprecating humor as he retrieved the fork. "Though I did once knock over an entire pitcher of water during a job interview, so perhaps this is an improvement." An entire pitcher? Erin had asked, eyebrows raised in amused disbelief. How did that even happen? Excessive gesturing, he'd admitted with a grin. "I was describing my thesis project with what my mother calls unnecessary Italian hand. Enthusiasm. The restaurant manager still hired me, though," said anyone who could laugh at themselves after drenching their potential boss had the right temperament for customer service. The memory of his laugh, rich and unguarded, still warmed her as they walked away from the restaurant, the evening stretching before them like an unwritten page. But it didn't matter. The small imperfections had only made the evening more genuine, more memorable. There was something endearing about the way real life inserted itself into romantic moments. A reminder that they were two actual people connecting, not characters in some glossy fantasy. Because Michael was funny and warm and attentive, and he looked at her like she was the only person in the room, even when she was doing something as mundane as buttering bread. That was the thing about him that continued to catch her off guard, his focus. Not the intense, uncomfortable staring of someone who didn't understand social boundaries, but the quiet attention of a man who found genuine delight in watching her exist in the world. When she spoke, he listened as if her words were valuable currency. When she laughed, his eyes crinkled at the corners with shared pleasure. Between bites and laughs, his hand had found hers under the table, thumb gently brushing her knuckles, like it was second nature now. And every time their eyes met, there was something electric behind it. Not just attraction. Connection. The distinction felt important. Attraction was simple, chemical, a response to physical stimuli. Connection was more complex, a recognition, a resonance that went beyond merely physical. It was finding unexpected common ground. They'd both gone through a teenage poetry phase. They both secretly loved terrible disaster movies. It was conversations that flowed without effort. It was comfortable silences that didn't need filling. They walked together in the soft silence of the city night, his jacket draped over her shoulders. The air was cool, the world hushed, like it was holding its breath just for them. His jacket smelled faintly of his cologne, something with notes of cedar and bergamot, and the lingering warmth from his body. He'd placed it over her shoulders with such natural gallantry that it hadn't felt performative, just considerate. The weight of it was comforting, intimate in a way that went beyond the merely practical. Erin's heels clicked softly on the pavement, but even that sound felt far away. What she felt most was the warmth of his hand at the small of her back, and the way her heart beat faster every time he leaned a little closer to say something that made her smile without meaning to. "See that building?" he murmured, pointing to an Art Deco masterpiece illuminated against the night sky. "The cornerstone has a time capsule buried beneath it. Supposedly contains a newspaper from 1927, a flask of Prohibition whiskey, and a flapper's garter." "How do you know that?" she asked, charmed by his knowledge of the city's secrets. "Architectural history minor," he replied with a smile. "Plus, I may have dated the granddaughter of the original architect briefly in college. She had all these incredible blueprints and stories." "Just briefly," Erin teased. "What happened?" "She wanted to modernize historical buildings. I wanted to preserve them," he said with mock solemnity. "Irreconcilable differences. They didn't rush. They never did." That had been another surprise about dating Michael, his patience. He never seemed hurried or anxious to get to the next moment, the next milestone. He inhabited each interaction fully, giving it his complete attention. Their goodnight kisses had grown progressively more intense over the past weeks, but he never pushed beyond where she was comfortable, never made her feel rushed toward intimacy she wasn't ready for. When they passed a park bench beneath a blooming cherry tree, he paused and gently pulled her to a stop. The tree was ethereal in the streetlight, its pale pink blossoms almost luminous against the dark branches. A few petals drifted down lazily, caught in the gentle night breeze like confetti in slow motion. "Sit with me." His voice was soft, almost reverent, as if he too felt the strange magic of the moment, and wanted to preserve it just a little longer. She nodded, letting him guide her down. The bench was cool beneath her, the wood smooth from years of use. Michael sat close enough that their shoulders touched, his thigh pressing lightly against hers through the silk of her dress. The contact was innocent, but charged with possibility, like a live wire waiting to be connected. For a few minutes, they just sat there. The breeze played with her hair. His fingers found hers again, their hands tangled easily now, like they'd learned the shape of each other. It was remarkable how quickly touching him had become familiar, not in the sense of being mundane, but in the way that suggested rightness, a physical dialogue that required no translation. His hands were slightly larger than hers, his fingers longer, his skin a shade darker. The contrast was pleasing, a visual reminder of their complementary differences. "You're quiet tonight," he said softly. Not accusatory or concerned, simply observant. He'd noticed her introspection, the moments when her thoughts had turned inward despite the pleasant conversation. "I'm thinking," she replied. "A lot." "Dangerous pastime," he teased gently, squeezing her hand. "Especially for beautiful women in burgundy dresses. Tends to lead to revolutions and other inconvenient historical events." She laughed, the sound carrying in the quiet night. "I'll try to contain my revolutionary tendencies to personal matters." "About?" He tilted his head slightly, genuinely curious. The streetlight caught the angles of his face, emphasizing the strong line of his jaw, the curve of his mouth. She turned and looked at him. "About how different this feels. Different from every other relationship she'd had, both as Ethan and as Erin. Different in ways she was still discovering, still trying to articulate even to herself." Michael smiled gently. "Good different. The best kind." The words weren't enough to convey what she meant, how being with him felt, like stepping into a room she'd never known existed, yet somehow recognized instantly. How each conversation, each touch, each shared moment seemed to reveal new facets of herself, of him, of what they could be together. He leaned in then, slow and sure, and kissed her. Not rushed, not hungry, just full of meaning. His lips were warm against hers. The kiss unhurried but purposeful. One hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing the sensitive skin just below her ear. He tasted faintly of the mint he'd taken after dinner, with undertones of the red wine they'd shared. A kiss that said, "I see you. I'm here. I'm not just physically present, but emotionally available, engaged, invested." The kiss of someone who wasn't just passing through her life, but deliberately choosing to stay to build something. And Erin kissed him back with everything she wasn't ready to say out loud. With the growing certainty that what they had was more than chemistry or convenience. With the hope that this connection might be sustainable, might endure beyond the initial attraction. With the fear and exhilaration of stepping into unknown territory without a map. When they finally broke apart, Michael rested his forehead against hers for a moment, his breath warm against her skin. Neither spoke immediately, letting the silence contain the weight of what had passed between them. "We should probably head back," he said eventually, his voice lower than before. "It's getting late." "Probably," she agreed, though she made no move to stand. The moment felt too precious to break, too perfect to hurry past. He stood first, offering his hand to help her up, another small courtesy that felt natural rather than performative. As she rose, a cherry blossom floated down, landing in her hair. Michael reached out, gently removing it, then showed it to her on his palm. "Make a wish," he said with a smile. "That's falling stars, not cherry blossoms," she replied, but closed her eyes briefly anyway, indulging in the whimsy of the moment. "Same principle," he insisted. "Ephemeral beauty deserves a wish." When they reached her apartment, the moment stretched. The hallway outside her door was quiet, the building settling into late-night stillness. The overhead light cast a soft glow that made everything seem slightly unreal, suspended between mundane reality and something more significant. They stood just outside the door, the kind of pause that holds 1,000 unsaid things. The air between them was charged with potential energy, with all the paths the night could still take. Goodnight kiss and separate ways. Lingering at the threshold. Something more. Michael brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, his voice low. "I had an amazing time." "Me too," Erin whispered. Her heart was thudding in her chest, her breath catching in her throat. She fumbled slightly with her keys, her usual dexterity compromised by the nervous energy coursing through her. The small metallic jingle seemed abnormally loud in the quiet hallway. She could feel it. That pull. That next step. It wasn't just physical desire, though that was certainly part of it. The way her skin seemed hypersensitive wherever he touched her, the pleasant tension that had been building in her body all evening. But it was more than that. It was the sense of standing at a threshold, of knowing that whatever happened next would change things irrevocably. Choice. Vulnerability. Want. Want. 3 simple words that contained universes of complexity. The choice to let someone close, to risk disappointment or rejection. The vulnerability of being seen, truly seen, with all the messy humanity that entailed. The want that went beyond physical desire to something more fundamental, the desire for connection, for understanding, for that rare feeling of being known. Her fingers toyed with the edge of his jacket still draped over her shoulders. The borrowed warmth of it felt symbolic somehow. A literal way he'd wrapped himself around her, protected her from the chill. Giving it back would be the natural conclusion to the evening, the expected choreography of a date night ending. But she wasn't ready for the night to end, wasn't ready to return to separate spaces, separate lives. And then she looked up at him, eyes soft, voice trembling just enough to betray her nerves. "Would you like to come in?" The invitation hung in the air between them, deceptively simple words carrying layers of meaning. Not just an invitation into her apartment, but into her private space, her life, her vulnerability. Michael blinked, just for a second. Not in surprise, but in sincerity. Like he was checking to make sure she meant it. His eyes searched hers, looking for any hint of hesitation or uncertainty. Finding none, his expression softened into something warm and certain. "You sure?" he asked quietly. Not pushing, not pressuring, just making absolutely certain they were on the same page. "I'm sure," she confirmed, surprised by the steadiness in her voice despite the fluttering in her stomach. "Very sure." Then his hand found hers again, and he nodded. "I'd love to." 3 more words, simple and profound. Not just agreement, but affirmation, of her invitation, of the connection between them, of the path they were choosing together. Erin turned, heart pounding, and unlocked the door. The metallic click of the lock disengaging seemed unusually final, like the sound of a decision being made concrete. She pushed the door open, revealing the darkened interior of her apartment, familiar to her but new to him, a space he'd never entered before. She stepped across the threshold first, then turned to watch him follow, closing the door quietly behind him. In the dim light, filtering through the curtains, his expression was both eager and tender, a combination that made her heart race even faster. They stood for a moment in the darkened entryway, the closed door creating a sense of intimacy, of separation from the outside world. Everything beyond this space, the city, their separate lives, the complexities waiting to be navigated, seemed distant, temporarily irrelevant. Here now, there was only the two of them, standing on the edge of something new. The apartment felt different with Michael inside. Not louder. Not busier. Just fuller. As if the space itself had been waiting for his presence, had known there was something missing until this moment. The familiar contours of her living room. The couch where she'd spent countless evenings with Madeline. The coffee table littered with magazines. The plants thriving in the corner window suddenly seemed new, viewed through the lens of someone seeing them for the first time. Erin slipped off her heels by the door, while Michael followed her in, his hand still loosely holding hers as if afraid to break the spell. The room was dim, lit only by the soft amber glow coming from the kitchen under cabinet lights. The absence of her heels changed their height dynamic. She was now several inches shorter than him, making her feel both more vulnerable and somehow more feminine. Her stockinged feet made no sound on the hardwood floor, in contrast to Michael's dress shoes, which created a gentle rhythm as he followed her inside. "I'll get us something to drink," Erin said, her voice softer than usual, like she was afraid her own pulse might be too loud. Mundane words, arbitrary really. They both knew drinks were the last thing on either of their minds, but they provided a momentary script, a familiar ritual to navigate this unfamiliar territory. She headed into the kitchen, reaching up into the cabinet for a pair of glasses. The silk of her dress shifted with her movements, catching the light, hugging her figure. Her heightened awareness of her own body was almost dizzying. The brush of fabric against her skin, the slight exposure as she stretched upward, the way her hair fell against her shoulders. Every sensation magnified, electrified by anticipation and the knowledge of being watched. Michael didn't answer right away. He just watched her. She could feel his gaze like a physical touch, trailing along the curves of her body, lingering at the places where the burgundy silk clung most closely. His silence held more weight than words, a deliberate restraint that vibrated with possibility. The way her body moved, the way her hair fell down her back, the way her fingers trembled slightly when she reached too high. Her hands weren't entirely steady as she grabbed 2 wine glasses, the crystal catching the subtle kitchen light and refracting it in tiny rainbows against the cabinets. There was something deliciously vulnerable about being observed this way. Not with the clinical assessment she'd grown accustomed to as Ethan, but with genuine appreciation, with desire that seemed to emanate from Michael like heat from a flame. The sexual tension was thick, tangible, like something that had been simmering for weeks and had finally found its boil. It wasn't just in her imagination. The air itself seemed charged, heavy with the electricity jumping between them. All those goodnight kisses, those lingering touches, those moments when their eyes had held a second too long. All of it had been building to this, a crescendo of want that couldn't be contained by polite distance any longer. As Erin placed the glasses on the counter, she felt it, him, before she heard anything. His presence registered as a shift in the air, a warmth at her back, the subtle change in the kitchen's acoustics. Even before contact, her body responded, skin prickling with awareness, breath catching slightly in anticipation. Michael stepped up behind her, his hands sliding gently around her waist, pulling her back into his chest. The contact was electric, his body solid and warm against hers, his hands firm but gentle as they settled at her waist. She could feel the steady rise and fall of his breathing, slightly quickened, but controlled, and the unmistakable evidence of his desire pressed against her. His lips brushed her neck. Once, twice, then again, slower. Each touch of his mouth sent shivers cascading through her, a domino effect of sensation that seemed to awaken every nerve ending in her body. The first kiss was a question, the second an affirmation, the third a declaration. The softest kiss, and then a firmer one, right below her ear. That spot, that perfect, sensitive hollow where neck meets jaw, sent a jolt of pleasure so intense it was almost shocking. How did he know? How did he find, without guidance, the exact place that made her knees weaken and her resolve crumble? Erin gasped, her breath catching, her back arching instinctively into him. A soft moan escaped her lips before she could silence it. The sound surprised her. She'd never been vocal during intimacy before, had always maintained a certain controlled reserve. But this body, this moment, this man seemed to bypass her usual restraint, drawing reactions that felt both foreign and deeply authentic. She was melting, if already. Whatever careful boundaries she'd constructed, whatever tentative plan she'd had for how the evening might progress, it was dissolving rapidly under the heat of his touch, the undeniable chemistry that had been building between them since that first coffee shop encounter. She turned around in his arms, her hands finding the collar of his shirt, her eyes wide and dark with need. His face in this light was a study in contrasts, planes, and angles, softened by shadows, his expression a mixture of desire and tenderness that made her breath catch. His eyes, usually a clear blue, were darkened now, pupils dilated as they locked with hers. "You're beautiful," he whispered, the words carrying a reverence that made her pulse quicken even further. "So beautiful it hurts." He kissed her then, really kissed her. Not the careful, measured kisses they'd shared at her door on previous dates. Not the gentle exploration of new territory. This was hunger and heat and need compressed into the meeting of mouths, the slide of tongues, the gentle scrape of teeth. And she kissed him back, like she wouldn't get another chance. Like he was the only oxygen left in the room. Her fingers tightened in the fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer, eliminating any remaining space between them. The counter edge pressed into her lower back, a solid reminder of reality in a moment that otherwise felt dream-like in its intensity. His hands found her hips, her lower back, all of her, and suddenly she was being lifted effortlessly onto the kitchen counter. The casual display of strength sent another thrill through her, the way he'd lifted her as if she weighed nothing. His hands firm but careful as he settled her on the cool granite surface. The height difference was now reversed, putting her slightly above him, allowing her to look down into his face as his hands settled on her thighs. her legs wrapped around his waist, the silk of her dress riding up her thighs as he pressed against her. Their bodies moved in sync, hungry, slow, sure. The position was intimate, almost scandalous, her legs open to him. The dress that had seemed so elegant now rumpled and pushed high on her legs, revealing the lace tops of her stockings. Yet there was nothing crude about it, nothing that felt wrong or rushed. Just the natural progression of desire, of two bodies seeking closer connection. The kiss deepened. His hands tangled in her hair. Hers slipped under his shirt, fingers exploring the warm skin of his back. She could feel the muscles shifting beneath her touch, the solid reality of him both foreign and familiar. His skin was hot, almost feverish, a contrast to the cool counter beneath her. His hair was thick between her fingers, slightly rough with product, but yielding as she guided him deeper into the kiss. Every breath was ragged. Every sound was shared. The kitchen seemed to fade around them, the outside world receding until there was only this. His mouth on hers, his hands on her body, the incredible heat building between them. She could feel his heart hammering in his chest, matching the rapid tattoo of her own pulse. Erin, he murmured against her lips. Her name transformed into something sacred, something hungry. God, I've wanted this. Wanted you since the moment I saw you. Me too, she whispered back, surprising herself with the honesty. I've been dreaming about your hands, your mouth. She ran her fingers along his jaw, feeling the slight roughness of evening stubble. All of you. But then, after minutes that felt like both forever and a blink, Erin pulled back. Not from uncertainty or hesitation, but from the sudden crystalline knowledge that she wanted more. Wanted everything. And not here against the kitchen counter like a hurried afterthought to their evening. Her lips were swollen, her chest rising fast, her eyes locked with his. In the dim light, his face was flushed, his expression a mixture of desire and something deeper, more tender. His breath came in short bursts that matched her own, his hands still resting possessively on her thighs. She didn't speak. Words seemed superfluous, inadequate for what was happening between them. The air itself was thick with unspoken communication, with understood intentions. She just took his hand in hers, slid down from the counter, and led him silently down the hallway. The journey from kitchen to bedroom was only a few meters, but it felt significant. Crossing from casual intimacy into something more deliberate, more consequential. Her fingers were intertwined with his, the connection both an anchor and a promise. Each step was heavy with purpose. Each breath louder than it should have been. The hallway was darker than the kitchen had been, casting them both in shadow that only intensified the intimacy of the moment. She was acutely aware of everything, the slight creak of the floorboards beneath their feet, the warmth of his hand in hers, the whisper of her dress against her legs as she moved. At her bedroom door, she paused. The moment crystallized, suspended in time. The two of them standing at the threshold, the darkness beyond both invitation and question. Her hand on the knob. His hand still in hers. His thumb traced small circles on her wrist. The gentle motion, somehow both soothing and arousing. His eyes never left hers, reading her expression with careful attention. "We don't have to," he said softly, the words barely audible. "We can slow down, take our time." The unspoken question hung in the air, but she didn't ask it. There was a strange comfort in his offer, in knowing he was as concerned with her comfort as with his own desire. But the time for hesitation had passed. She wanted this, wanted him, with a clarity that left no room for doubt. She knew the answer. She rose on tiptoes, pressing a soft kiss to the corner of his mouth. "I don't want to slow down," she whispered. her voice steadier than she expected. "I've never been more sure of anything." She opened the door. The room beyond was bathed in soft moonlight filtering through sheer curtains, casting everything in silver and shadow. Her bed, neatly made this morning in anticipation of the possibility of this moment, dominated the space, the white duvet almost luminous in the darkness. They stepped inside. The air was cool against her heated skin, raising goosebumps along her arms. Michael followed close behind her, his presence solid and reassuring at her back. She felt rather than saw him closing the door, heard the quiet click as it latched. And as it closed softly behind them, their lips found each other again. This kiss was different, deeper, more assured, tinged with the certainty of what was to come. His hands cradled her face with exquisite gentleness, thumbs brushing her cheekbones as if memorizing their contours. "You're sure," he murmured against her mouth, giving her one final chance to reconsider. In response, she reached behind her, finding the zipper of her dress and slowly drawing it down. The whisper of the metal teeth parting was loud in the quiet room, the release of fabric, a tangible surrender. She held his gaze as the dress loosened, slipping slightly off one shoulder. "Completely sure," she answered, and guided his hands to the straps of her dress, inviting him to continue what she'd started. His fingers were warm against her skin, as he slowly, reverently pushed the silk down her shoulders, his breath catching audibly as more of her was revealed. The dress slipped lower, past her collarbones, exposing the delicate lace of her bra, the curve of her breasts, the smooth plane of her stomach. "You're perfect," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion and desire. "Absolutely perfect." As the dress pulled at her feet, leaving her in nothing but lingerie and stockings, she felt no self-consciousness. No hesitation, just the exhilarating freedom of being desired, of being cherished, of being exactly where she was meant to be. She reached for the buttons of his shirt, her fingers working quickly, but not hurriedly, each new exposure of skin a discovery to be savored. As the fabric parted, revealing the firm planes of his chest, the definition of his abdomen, she felt a surge of appreciation. Not just for his physical beauty, but for the man himself, for the connection that had brought them to this moment. "Your turn to be perfect," she murmured, sliding the shirt from his shoulders, letting her hands trail over the newly revealed skin. He laughed softly, a sound of both pleasure and slight self-consciousness. "Hardly perfect," he demurred, but pulled her closer, skin against skin now, heat meeting heat. The contact was electric, drawing matching gasps from both of them. Her hands found his shoulders, his back, learning the topography of him through touch. His lips traced a path from her mouth to her jaw, down the column of her throat, each kiss more heated than the last. When he lifted her again, this time to carry her the few steps to the bed, she felt weightless, suspended in a moment of pure connection. The cool softness of the duvet met her back as he laid her down with exquisite care, following her down, his body a welcome weight above hers. What followed was a slow, deliberate exploration, hands mapping unknown terrain, lips discovering sensitive places, bodies learning the language of each other's pleasure. There was no rush, no hurry, just the gradual building of sensation, of intimacy, of connection that transcended the merely physical. And later, much later, when they lay tangled together, breath still coming fast, heart still racing in tandem, Erin knew with absolute certainty that everything had changed. Not just tonight, not just between them, but within her, a shift as profound as it was irrevocable. Michael's arms tightened around her, drawing her closer against the solid warmth of his chest. His lips pressed a gentle kiss to her temple, lingering there as if reluctant to break even that small connection. "Stay," she whispered. Not a question, but an invitation to the night, to the morning, to whatever might come after. His answer was in the tightening of his embrace, in the soft kiss pressed to her shoulder, in the contented sigh that seemed to come from deep within him. And as sleep began to claim them both, Erin felt herself sinking into a peace she hadn't known was possible, complete, profound, and entirely unexpected.